Sometimes we look back at the seasons we've been through and pat ourselves on the back as if it was our wisdom, our hustle, our determination, or our grit that got us through. We start thinking we survived because we were strong enough, smart enough, disciplined enough, or brave enough to endure the pain. But if you really pause and rewind the tape of your life, you'll realize there were moments you didn't have the strength to keep going, moments you didn't have the clarity to know what to do next, moments you didn't even have the will to pray, yet somehow you made it through. That's because your survival is not your strength. It's his sustaining power. It wasn't your plan that held you together. It was his hand. There were nights you cried yourself to sleep and still woke up with breath in your lungs. There were days you thought you'd lose your mind, but somehow found peace that didn't make sense. That wasn't you digging deep. That was God reaching down. You didn't survive because you held onto him so tightly. You survived because he refused to let go of you. Think about the seasons when you were so overwhelmed, you couldn't even form the words to ask for help, yet help still came. Think about the storms that should have destroyed you, the heartbreak that should have hardened you, the losses that should have left you bitter. But instead, you're still here, still breathing, still believing. That's not because you are unshakable. It's because he is. The enemy would love for you to believe you're the one holding it all together, so that when you finally get weary, you'll collapse under the weight. But the truth is, you are not the glue God is. You are not the source God is. You are not the reason you survived. God is. And the more you understand that, the more peace you'll find in the middle of your battles. Because if it's his power that's sustaining you, then it's not your exhaustion that determines the outcome. You may be tired, but he's not tired. You may feel weak, but his strength is perfect in your weakness. You may feel like you can't take another step, but he's not asking you to. He's carrying you. This is why the Bible says his mercies are new every morning, because what got you through yesterday wasn't leftover strength. It was fresh grace for a brand new day. And that grace will meet you again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. There's a reason you've come through things that would have crushed somebody else. There's a reason you've been able to stand up again after life knocked you flat. It's because God has been sustaining you in ways you didn't even see. You might think you've been walking on your own 2 feet, but if you could see in the Spirit, you'd realize you've been carried more than you've been walking. You'd see his hands under you in the valley and his arm around you in the fire. You'd see his shadow covering you when the arrows were flying. You'd see his provision showing up when the resources ran out. You'd see his voice guiding you when you didn't know which way to turn. And if he's been sustaining you this far, he's not going to drop you now. You don't have to be afraid of running out of strength, because your strength was never the point. He is the point. He is the source. He is the reason you're still standing. So stop putting pressure on yourself to be the hero of your own story and start recognizing that the real hero has been God all along. He's the reason you made it through that season, the reason you didn't drown in that storm, the reason you didn't break under that burden. And if you keep your eyes on him instead of your own ability, you'll realize you don't have to muster up enough willpower to finish this journey. You just have to rest in the one who has been carrying you every step of the way. It's easy to believe God is with you when the skies are clear, though the waters are calm and everything in life feels steady. But the moment the wind starts howling and the waves start crashing, something inside of us begins to wonder if he's still around. The storm makes you question his presence because it doesn't feel like a loving God would allow such chaos to surround you. But storms don't mean God left. They mean he's steering. The disciples learned this firsthand when they were in the boat with Jesus and the storm came suddenly. The waters were violent, the winds were fierce, and fear gripped their hearts. They mistook his calmness for carelessness because while they were panicking, he was sleeping. They thought if he was really with them, he would have stopped the storm immediately. But what they didn't realize was that the presence of the storm didn't indicate his absence. It actually revealed his authority. Sometimes God doesn't calm the waves right away because he wants to teach you that he's still in control, even when everything looks out of control. You see, if God removed every storm the moment it started, you'd trust the calm instead of trusting the captain. But when the storm rages and the boat feels like it's about to sink, you learn that his power isn't limited to sunny days. It works in the darkness, the danger, and the deep. The storm is not proof that God abandoned you. It's proof that he's taking you somewhere you've never been before. Storms are often the transportation for your transformation. Without them, you'd stay anchored in familiar waters, never stretching your faith, never discovering how strong his hand really is. That's why some of your most defining moments with God didn't happen in comfort, but in chaos. And here's the thing about storms. When you can't see where you're going, you have to trust the one who does. You may not understand the route. You may not like the conditions. You may not even recognize the horizon you're headed toward. But the one steering your life has already seen the destination, and he's not intimidated by what's between here and there. The storm might make you feel small, but it doesn't make God any less sovereign. The winds obey him. The waves bow to him. The seas know his voice. And when he's at the helm, nothing in the atmosphere can override his authority. That means no diagnosis can sink you before your purpose is fulfilled. No betrayal can derail you before your destiny is reached. No loss can capsize you before his plan is complete. The storm is loud, but his hand is steady. The storm is unpredictable, but his guidance is sure. You might be drenched with disappointment, confusion, and fear right now, but even in the downpour, he's directing your course. And if you think about it, there are things you've learned in storms that you could have never learned in the sunshine. You learned how to pray when the wind knocked the words out of you. You learned how to worship when the rain blurred your vision. You learned how to cling to him when you had nothing else to hold on to. And you learned that survival wasn't in your ability to row harder. It was in your willingness to trust the one who knew exactly where to turn the wheel. The storm doesn't mean God forgot about you. It means he's leading you through waters that will become part of your testimony. And one day, when you're standing on the other shore, you'll realize the storm that felt like it was going to destroy you is actually the very thing God used to deliver you to the next chapter of your calling. It's a strange thing about life with God. What feels like a finish line to you might actually be just a comma in his sentence. We tend to measure our lives by moments, and when those moments are painful, we convince ourselves it's the end of the story. The job loss feels final. The relationship ending feels permanent. The diagnosis feels like the closing chapter. The betrayal feels like the last page. But with God, what feels like the end is often the middle of the story. The disciples felt this when they watched Jesus hanging on the cross. They heard him say, "It is finished." And they thought he meant their hope was over. Their mission was dead. Their future was gone. But what they didn't know was that the cross was not the conclusion. It was the middle of the greatest redemption story ever written. Friday felt final, but Sunday was coming. And that same principle is true in your life. The season you think is a burial might actually be a planting. The loss you think is the end might actually be the setup for something new to grow. God writes stories in layers. And just because you're in a painful paragraph doesn't mean he's done writing the book. If you judge his work too soon, you'll miss the plot twist. Joseph felt the end when his brothers threw him in the pit. He felt it again when he was sold into slavery. He felt it again when he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. Each time, it looked like his life was over, but it wasn't. It was the middle. God was weaving every hardship into a bigger plan that Joseph couldn't see at the time. The pit was not the end. The prison was not the end. They were all just parts of the process leading to the palace. And it's the same with you. The enemy wants you to mistake the middle for the end, because if he can convince you it's over, you'll give up before the breakthrough comes. But God's perspective is higher than yours. He sees the whole map while you're staring at one street. He sees the entire tapestry while you're looking at a single thread. And sometimes, what you think is a setback is actually a scene change. The curtain may have closed on one act, but the play is still going. You're still breathing, which means God is still working. You may feel like the light has gone out, but sometimes he turns the lights down because he's setting the stage for the next part. You may feel like the door has slammed shut, but sometimes he closes one door so that he can open the right one at the right time. You may feel like you've run out of resources, but sometimes he lets the jar run empty so that you'll see it's his hand filling it, not your own effort. Your feelings may tell you it's the end, but faith will remind you that God is still writing. And if you'll trust him in the middle, you'll see that what you thought was a period was actually a comma, and the sentence isn't done yet. He's still the author, and he never leaves a story half written. Every plot twist is intentional. Every delay is on purpose. Every detour is part of the design. And one day, when you turn the page, you'll look back on what felt like an ending and realize it was the exact place where the most important chapter of your story began. We spend so much of our lives trying to avoid weakness, covering it up, hiding it from others, and even trying to hide it from ourselves. We think strength is what earns us respect, favor, and opportunity. So we build walls around our vulnerabilities and pretend we have it all together. But the paradox of God's kingdom is that his presence is strongest in your weakest place. That's not just a poetic idea. It's a reality that plays out all throughout Scripture and in the lives of those who follow him. When Paul begged God to remove the thorn from his flesh, God's answer wasn't, "I'll take it away." His answer was, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." God wasn't saying weakness was a flaw to be fixed. He was saying it was the very space where his power could be fully displayed. Because when you are at the end of yourself, when your own wisdom can't solve the problem, when your own effort can't carry the weight, when your own courage can't silence the fear, that's when his presence becomes undeniable. Weakness is not an obstacle to God's work. It's an invitation for him to show up in ways you couldn't manufacture on your own. Think about Gideon hiding in a wine press, feeling unqualified and insignificant, yet God called him a mighty warrior. God didn't wait for Gideon to feel strong before he used him. He met him right in his insecurity. Think about Moses, stuttering and trembling before Pharaoh, yet carrying the authority of the Most High. God didn't wait for Moses to be eloquent. He filled his mouth with words and his staff with power in the very place Moses felt inadequate. And think about David, facing Goliath with no armor and only a sling, standing in the obvious reality of his size and weakness, yet walking in the unseen reality of God's strength. Over and over, God chooses to show his presence most clearly in moments where human strength runs out. That's because if you could do it on your own, you wouldn't need him. Your weakness creates space for his glory to be revealed. Sometimes we keep asking God to take away the thing that makes us feel small. But what if that's the very thing that's keeping you close to him? What if that thorn in your flesh, that limp in your walk, that gap in your resume, that ache in your heart, is the reason you're leaning into his presence more than you ever have before? We don't like to admit it, but strength can make us self-reliant, while weakness makes us God-reliant. And it's in that reliance that his presence becomes tangible. It's in those desperate prayers you whisper through tears. In those moments you lift your hands, even though you don't feel like worshiping. In those silent car rides when you're too tired to speak, but too hungry to quit. That's where he shows up. His presence isn't just a concept. It's a sustaining force that holds you when you can't hold yourself. You may feel like you're at your breaking point, but he's not wringing his hands in heaven wondering how to help you. He's already there, in the room with you, in the conversation with you, in the decision you have to make, in the uncertainty you're facing. And if you could see what's happening in the spiritual realm, you'd realize that your weakest moment might actually be the strongest place you've ever stood. Not because of you, but because of him. Your weakness doesn't push him away, it draws him in. Your inability doesn't disqualify you, it positions you for a fresh encounter. Your lack doesn't make him hesitate, it makes him pour out more. So maybe instead of resenting your weakness, you could start recognizing it as the meeting place between your humanity and his divinity, the place where your strength fails and his begins, the place where you discover that what you thought was a disadvantage was actually the doorway for his presence to fill your life in a way you've never experienced before. There's a difference between walking with God and being carried by God. And most of us don't realize how often we've been carried until we look back. We like to picture ourselves as strong travelers on this journey of faith, holding his hand, matching his steps, keeping up with his pace. But the truth is, there have been seasons when you weren't walking at all. You weren't steady. You weren't even moving forward. You were too weak, too tired, too broken, or too lost to take another step. And that's when God didn't just walk beside you. He picked you up. You thought you were barely making it. But the reality is you weren't making it. You were being carried. You can see it in the moments you don't know how you made it through the grief, the loss, the heartbreak, the anxiety, or the depression. You can see it in the nights you cried yourself to sleep, but still woke up with breath in your lungs and enough strength to face another day. That wasn't you pulling yourself together. That was God holding you together. You weren't dragging your feet through that valley. You were in his arms the entire time. And it's not just in crisis moments that he carries you. It's in the quiet ones too. Every day, without even realizing it, you are being lifted by his mercy, sustained by his grace, and upheld by his strength. You take steps because he's giving you breath. You stand because he's giving you balance. You keep going because he's giving you endurance. It's like a parent carrying a sleeping child. Sometimes the child is aware, and sometimes they're completely oblivious. But either way, the destination is reached because the parent refused to let them fall. That's how God moves in your life. There are times he lets you walk so you can learn to trust. But there are also times he knows you're too worn out to keep moving, so he carries you himself. And often, it's in hindsight that you realize just how much he did for you when you thought you were doing it alone. You'll look back on a season and say, I don't even remember how I made it through that. And that's because you didn't. He carried you. The enemy would love to make you feel like you're failing because you can't keep up, like you're falling behind, like you should be stronger than you are right now. But the gospel is not about your ability to walk perfectly. It's about his willingness to carry you faithfully. Isaiah 40:64 says, I will carry you. I will sustain you. I will rescue you. That's not a temporary promise for emergencies only. That's his nature. He doesn't carry you reluctantly or out of pity. He carries you because he loves you and refuses to leave you stranded. And when you really understand that, you stop measuring your spiritual life by how fast you're moving and start measuring it by how much you're relying on him. Because the truth is, you could be sprinting, but in the wrong direction, or you could be still in his arms, completely safe and on course. When you're being carried, you don't have to know the route. You don't have to figure out the next step. You don't have to map the journey. You just have to trust the one whose arms are holding you. And maybe right now, that's exactly what he's doing for you. carrying you through the heartbreak that feels unbearable, carrying you through the uncertainty that feels overwhelming, carrying you through the fear that feels paralyzing. You don't have to try to be strong enough, because your survival doesn't depend on your steps. It depends on His strength. And His strength never fails. Even when you can't feel Him, He's carrying you. Even when you can't see where you're going, He's carrying you. Even when you think you're standing on your own, He's carrying you. And one day, when you get to the other side of this, you'll realize you didn't just make it. You were carried the whole way. The very thing the enemy designed to destroy you is going to become the evidence that God was with you all along. What tried to break you will not be the end of you. It will be the proof that you were carried, sustained, and delivered by a power greater than yourself. You see, the devil doesn't waste his attacks on people who aren't a threat. The fact that you faced what you faced is proof that there's something valuable inside of you worth attacking. But here's the part the enemy didn't calculate. Every attempt to break you is an opportunity for God to show His glory through you. Joseph's brothers thought throwing him in a pit and selling him into slavery would erase his dream, but all it did was position him for the palace. Daniel's enemies thought the lion's den would silence his faith, but all it did was amplify God's protection. The 3 Hebrew boys, accusers, thought the fiery furnace would consume them, but all it did was display the presence of the 4th man walking with them in the fire. The cross was meant to end Jesus' influence, but it became the very symbol of salvation for the whole world. Over and over, Scripture shows us that what was meant for harm, God uses for good, and the same is true for your life. The heartbreak that should have left you bitter will one day become the story that inspires someone else to hope again. The betrayal that should have made you hard will become the testimony that forgiveness is possible. The loss that should have left you empty will become the evidence that God can fill every void. The season that should have left you hopeless will become the reason you can look someone in the eye and tell them, I know He can bring you through, because He did it for me. This is why you can't quit in the middle of the fight, because the proof is still being written. The scar you carry will speak louder than the wound ever could. When people see you standing, smiling, thriving after what you've been through, they won't be able to deny that something supernatural had to be holding you up. And you'll be able to say with confidence, it wasn't my strength. It was God's hand. That divorce didn't destroy you. It revealed that His love is deeper than human rejection. That diagnosis didn't end you. It revealed that His healing is more than physical. It's emotional and spiritual. That financial collapse didn't ruin you. It revealed that your provider was never your paycheck. It was always your Father. Every tear you cried, every night you thought you wouldn't make it to morning, every moment you felt like you couldn't take another step, they will all become the evidence of His faithfulness. And here's the beauty of it. When God brings you through something, He doesn't just restore you to the way things were before. He strengthens you, deepens you, and equips you to carry something you couldn't have carried before. You come out of the fire without the smell of smoke, but with the authority to speak to others still in the flames. You come out of the storm with a testimony that calms the fears of those still in the boat. You come out of the valley with a faith that doesn't waver when the shadows get long. That's why the enemy's plan always backfires, because the very attack meant to take you out becomes the platform for you to lift God's name higher. What tried to break you becomes the stage where God's power is put on display. And every time you tell your story, every time you show your scars, every time you open your mouth to declare what He has done, you are holding up the undeniable proof that no matter what hell throws at you, heaven's plan will always prevail.